Hello, welcome back to the Poker Channel. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I make videos about playing poker, mostly high stakes, sometimes lower stakes, sometimes really low stakes. Anyway, today we are going to be playing high stakes, 100, 200 at Hustler Casino Live. I'm currently reporting from an empty house that I was fortunate enough to get. I hinted at this in previous videos, if you guys saw those. I was finally able to find the place that I loved. Very lucky to be able to secure a little home here. It's nothing crazy, but it's definitely nice enough for me at least. So yeah, I'm also wearing these glasses on stream and on the video because I have a sty, which I don't think is the best look. So I'm trying to spare you guys. There's a little red bump on my eye. Don't want to freak anyone out. That's enough blabbering. I'm late to play poker, so let's head over to Hustler Casino and hope that things go well today. It's Monday, it's the start of high stakes week. There's gonna be some big swings coming up. Let's go. All right, everyone, here we go once more at Hustler. The start of high stakes week. Today the stakes are 100, 200, 400. We did play 100, 200 technically at the start, but it quickly changed after like 30 minutes or so. I sit with $100,000 and we are underway in the first interesting hand, looking down at pocket queens. A very nice start to the day, especially so when Santos raises up the action to 1,400. Mo calls in the small blind, and I make it $9,000. Just a standard raise 10 minutes into the session. Santos makes the call, as does Mo. So we've got $27K in the middle going three ways to a flop, which is pretty good for pocket queens. It's Jack 6-2 with two diamonds. So we've got the overpair and the emergency backdoor flush draw. Mo checks, and being in between two players, I think you could go either way here between checking or betting. I assume betting is probably the standard play, but this time I decide to get a little sneaky and check it, see if Santos wants to stab at this board, and he does by putting in $18,000. Pretty big bet, even relative to the size of the pot. Mo folds his ace-9, and when it gets back to me, we have a decision between just calling and allowing him to bluff future streets or jamming all in right now. Considering that he's got $70,000 behind, the pot is pretty big now compared to his stack, so I decide to check raise all in. Being out of position was the main factor for this. If I was in position, I probably would have just called. But if he's got a flush draw, top pair, maybe even a non-believing pocket pair or middle pair, he might call in hopes that I've got two overs or a flush draw myself. And it seems that that's the case because he does eventually call with his Jack 8 of spades. So just casually, 5 minutes into the day, we have a $200,000 pot. Will this be a hot start to the day? Let's find out as we go to two runouts.
$203,000 pot. Mariano picks up a flush draw. He's looking great here.
Yeah, he has the nuts.
Makes the nut flush on the first run out. A jack or an 8 for Santos. There's the jack.
What a call.
Chop it up, gentlemen.
Yeah, so unfortunately we are unable to hold on the second board, and we chop this one up. Still profit a little bit on the hand, but would have been nicer to get the full double up, obviously. In the next one, action folds to me on the button looking down at King 8 of spades. I open it up to 1,000. Santos calls from the big blind, and then Harry makes it 4,000 from the third blind. Considering that I opened on the button and Santos called in the blind, I think Harry could be a little wider than normal here. So that, combined with the fact that I have a suited king with not a whole lot of post-flop playability. If I had like king-queen suited or king-jack suited, perhaps I would just call. But with a hand like this, I think it's a good candidate to be aggressive with. Calling is probably also okay, but this time I decide to take the aggressive route and make it 10,000 to go, regain the betting lead, and hopefully put Harry in a tough spot with a variety of hands he might have. King-queen suited is certainly one of those hands because even though we are dominated, when we both miss the flop, I'll get the chance to win this pot more often than not. Queen 6 deuce, however, is not one of those flops. He's got himself a really strong hand with top pair, second best kicker. Of course, I don't know that, so when he checks, I bet small, just like I would if I had something strong myself. After he makes the call, however, I'm not loving the situation, especially without a spade on the flop. So the 3 of hearts on the turn shouldn't really change anything. I decide to wave the white flag. Maybe we'll hit a king on the river. Unbeknownst to me, that would be a disaster, of course, but instead it's the 3 of diamonds. Now Harry leads out for some amount, I think in the neighborhood of 15,000, and I just fold right away. So that hand might have seemed standard somewhat. This next one is anything but that. There's 2 limps from Pepe and Mo, and I look down at the dream. Pocket aces in middle to late position. Of course, I raise it up to 2,800 and get no less than 4 callers, including the 2 limpers. So we are going just 5 ways with pocket aces. Not ideal, but 9-8-8 on the flop is not the worst thing ever. Unless someone's got an 8 or pocket 9s, we should still be good. It's not too scary of a board. However, I don't necessarily want to bet 5 ways, so this one checks all the way around, and we see the queen of diamonds on the turn. Still doesn't seem too scary unless someone's got jack 10, but I would have expected players behind me to bet jack 10 at least sometimes after I check the flop. However, Pepe and Mo could still easily have jack 10 since they were just checking to the razor on the flop. But Pepe checks again, and Mo checks again also. So now I feel like I most likely have the best hand. Again, though, I decide to check it, and now Brandon puts in a bet of $7,000, right around half pot. Santosh makes the call with his open-ender. Pepe calls as well, and then Mo calls as well. So that's all players still in the hand. Pot is now at $42,000, and it gets back to me. What do we do here? On one hand, it seems like most likely I've got the best hand. On the other, we could be getting a little too fancy with a raise here in fear of someone having an 8 or jack 10, maybe even slow playing a full house, which I don't think is too likely, but not impossible. So I weigh the options back and forth and decide, more often than not, I think I have the best hand. And there's plenty of hands to get value from, like draws, any queen. I guess that's about it. But there are plenty of those combinations available, so I make it 32,000 to go. Brandon now makes a tight fold with his king-queen, which was a pretty nice play from him. Santosh folds as well, gets back to Pepe, and he doesn't love it, but he makes the call. Mo gets out of the way, so it's just heads up going to a river. Pot is $100,000, and I'm rooting for a clean river, which is what we get. It's the 6 of hearts. So unless he's got like 7, 10 of spades, we're probably going to be doing just fine. And if he did have 10, 7 of spades, I'm sure he would have let out on the turn after the flop checked around. So essentially, I've got a good feeling that we still have the best hand. However, what hands could we get value from once Pepe checks it to me? And the truth is, not many. Top pair, of course, any queen would be a hand that we're targeting. Maybe even queen 9, since that, of course, we still beat, but he might suspect is the winning hand. Could also have a non-believing, let's say, 7, 5 of spades type of holding. Maybe a 10, 6 of spades type of holding. That rivers a pair and gets a little curious against a bet. Of course, this is very optimistic, but keep in mind that I've played a lot of hands versus Pepe at this point, primarily during my private game on the weekends here at Hustler. So there's a lot of history on the line, and we've bluffed each other a fair amount, and also hero called each other a fair amount. So against some players, I think this would be a little too thin, but against Pepe, I decide to go for some value if he's got the queen high flush draw that missed out and ends up just being top pair, or even a slow played ace queen, for example. He does like to play strong hands pre-flop passively sometimes. So yeah, I do decide to go for value. Don't want to bet too big though, so I put in a bet of $40,000. Only 40% the size of the pot. I'm well aware that sometimes I'll end up getting called by a better hand, like an 8. I guess jack 10 that plays a little gently, let's say. But I also think that Pepe will call with a queen or even some weaker holdings from time to time. So all that to say, Pepe, of course, this time has a better hand than me and in the end ends up calling. So we do lose this one. Questionable whether or not I should bet the river. You could argue that it's too thin, but you could also argue that it would have been a cool value bet if he did have a queen. We'll never know. In this case, however, it is the worst result possible for me, and we are suddenly stuck a bunch of money with our work cut out for us. All right, in this next hand, we are going to go back to a somewhat standard style. So this one, Charles limps in for 400. Martin makes it 3,000 in late position. Mo calls on the button, and I've got pocket tens in the small blind. Worthy of a re-raise, I think, so I make it 16K to go. Martin calls with his 8-7 suited, but no one else does. So we're going heads up to a flop, which is not bad for tens. It's Jack 7-5 rainbow. Yeah, there's an overcard out there, but not too often he's going to have a jack in his hand. So I bet small, 11K, right around a third the size of the pot, maybe a little less. Martin makes the call with his middle pair and backdoor draws, and we get a good turn card. It's the deuce of spades. At this point, however, my hand is strong enough to continue, but not strong enough to bet for value again, I think. So I decide to check. It also gives him the option to bluff with hands that might have floated the flop, like let's say 6-8 or King Queen, all these sorts of holdings. Martin does not take the bait, however, and we go to a river. The ace of spades is not ideal because now hands that might have floated the flop connect on the river, like let's say ace 10 suited or ace 3 suited, you know, these kinds of backdoor holdings he might have continued on the flop with. And even if he doesn't hit the ace, it makes it tougher for us to get value from a lesser pair. On some other cards, I might have bet, but on the ace, I check. Martin checks back, and we win this one. Not the biggest pot ever, but we do profit $31,000, which at this point is a very welcome sight, considering that it's been a rough night so far. This hand right here is another example of how I haven't necessarily been running the best lately. I raise it up with ace-jack. Everyone and their mother calls, and we flop a super strong one. It's king-jack-jack with 2 spades. As you guys can see from the holdings, Brian has top pair and Mo has a flush draw. So when I bet 3,300, Brian calls and then Mo folds his flush draw somehow. For whatever reason, he just wasn't feeling it. And of course, we get the dream turn card. It's the ace of spades, which would have given Mo a flush and of course me a full house, but he has wisely escaped this pot. And to add insult to injury, this card lets Brian get off the hook with his single pair of kings. So when he checks and I continue for 12K, hoping that Brian's the one with the flush, he of course is not and ends up folding. So we do make a full house, but somehow end up winning the minimum. That's just how it goes sometimes, but still can't complain too much about finally making a strong hand. Maybe this is a sign of things to come.
Nice hand.
Mo, dodging bullets.
All right, moving on. Let's see if we could keep that momentum going, this time with 9-7 of hearts. I make it 1,300 and get an army of callers as we go to a flop, which is about as good as it gets for this 9 high. 10-6-5 with 2 hearts. That means I've got a straight draw, a flush draw, and a straight flush draw. Backdoor trips draw. That's about it, actually. So when the action checks to me, I continue with a bet, despite being up against the entire table, it seems. I put in $4,000. Brandon calls on my left with his bottom pair, nut low kicker. Pepe also calls with 4-3 offsuit. That's an open-ender on the flop. I'm just hoping to hit a flush or a straight, of course, and also thinking that maybe one of these guys has a higher flush draw, but not super concerned with that. The deuce of spades shouldn't change anything, and I'm wondering whether or not I'm going to bet this one. When Pepe takes the decision from me by leading out for nearly a pot-sized bet, 17,000, I gotta say I like this play from him when turning the straight. Can't let a free card come on the river, and there's a high likelihood that everyone would have checked this card. Pepe decides instead to take matters into his own hands. I, of course, call. We could hit a flush or a straight and potentially win a big pot later on. Fingers crossed that Brandon doesn't raise behind me, but given how the action's gone down, I don't think he will unless he's got like a super strong hand. But if he did, he probably would have raised on the flop. Anyways, he calls as well. As you guys can see, he's turned 2 pair with his 5-deuce offsuit, so this was definitely the action card. But no problem. I'm actually glad that both of these guys have strong hands because that means we could get paid on the river if we get there. Let's see if that happens.
Call. Brandon drawing to a 5 or a deuce. Mariano an 8 or a heart. It's the king of clubs.
Right, so just another brick, another frustrating spot as we do not get there after having such high hopes on this board. Instead, we end up with 9 high after all. Pepe now leads out for some amount. I fold right away. Brandon, however, does not with his 2 pair. Pretty good bluff catcher. Unfortunately for him, Pepe's got it this time, and he's going to take down another big pot. Moving on, we improve from 9 high to pocket kings. In this one, Brandon raises up the action from first position to 2,000, and it gets all the way to me in the $400 blind. And almost always I would re-raise, but this time I elect to just call, in fear of Brandon folding pre-flop. But not just that, I think kings are a good hand to occasionally just call with when you're up against a first position raise. Perhaps a little bit too technical for this kind of game. I would not argue that whatsoever, but this time I do decide to call, and we go to a flop of 9-7-7 with 2 clubs. Pretty good board for the big blind defending, so when I check and Brandon puts in a bet, I elect to check raise right away to somewhere in the neighborhood of $13,000, I believe. Yeah, 13.4. Brandon makes the call with his pocket twos, which is optimistic at best, and we see the 10 of diamonds on the turn. Should be a good card for me in general, and of course I've still got a super strong holding with these pocket kings, so I decide to continue betting right around the size of the pot. Hopefully Brandon's got jacks or queens, maybe even ace-10 of clubs, these sorts of holdings, but instead he's just got these weak pocket twos, which he folds right away. Still, we do take down some money in this one, no problem with that. All right, moving right along on this fun night of poker. In this one, the action gets around to Mo in the small blind, who makes it 3,000, and I'm next to act with Jack 7 suited. Not really strong enough to call, but I do think from time to time, getting frisky and raising it up is a good play with this exact hand in position. Folding also completely reasonable since Jack 7 is nothing special, but this time I'm going for it. I make it 9K to go. As you guys can see, we have a little over 100,000. I am in for 200,000. We got our work cut out for us. Let's see if we can make this hand work. Gets back around to Mo, who makes the call, so we go heads up to a flop, which is not great. It's 10-8-6 with 2 hearts. Technically speaking, it's not too bad since we have an overcard and a straight draw, but generally as the pre-flop re-raiser, this is going to be a lot better for my opponent than for me. So when he checks, I check it back. And what do you know? We get there right away. It's the 9 of spades. Even better is that Mo now leads out for $11,000. We've got ourselves a straight, and not just any straight, since a 7, of course, would be a straight for him too, but the jack high straight. Be that as it may, however, I want Mo to continue bluffing if he's got a flush draw or any sort of bluff at all, really, since I do expect him to bluff at a high frequency on this exact turn card. So I decided to just call in position, and we see an offsuit ace on the river, which is nice. There were 2 flush draws out there, so nice that neither of those gets there. It does, however, put an overcard to the 10 on the board, so if my opponent's got a 10, maybe now it's going to be harder to get some value. Nevertheless, I'm going to try it after he checks it to me on this river. I decide to bet small in hopes that he might turn a pair into a bluff or go for a check raise with a 7, which of course would be ideal since I can beat just a 7. However, Mo decides against any of that fancy play stuff and just folds his Jack 10 right away. Nice play from him, so we don't win the maximum, but still nice to take this one down. Always feels good to make a strong hand. In the next one, I raise it up to 1,000. Brandon calls on my left, and then Santosh makes it 8,000 on the button. A re-raise in position, but quite the big size nevertheless. Gets back around to me, and with pocket 7s out of position, I think you could go either way between calling or just folding sometimes. I know it seems a little too tight, but we're playing deep and we're out of position. Plus this raise is huge, which I think generally just means you should play a little tighter against big sizings. However, I decide to give some action with pocket 7s. And of course, if we flop a set, that could be great if Santosh actually has a strong hand. So I make the call and we go to a flop of Jack 10-6 rainbow. I check it to him and now he fires out for a C-bet. And that's kind of the problem with calling re-raises with these sorts of pairs is even when your opponent doesn't necessarily connect, as you guys can see here, he's just got queen 9. You're going to lose often. You know, they're either going to have a lot of outs against your exact hand or they're going to be able to bluff you on good boards. And that's what's happening here as I let go of my pocket 7s. Next one's a lot more spicy. There's a raise from Martin in late position to 800. Mo calls on the button, and then it's on me in the small blind with a suited ace. Against such a small size, Martin did essentially min-raise since the big blind is 400. So against such a small size, and considering that there's a raiser and a caller in late position, I think a suited ace is a good candidate to squeeze with. Ace 7 is the worst suited ace of all the suited aces. Perhaps Ace 6 might be a little worse, but Ace 7 is right down there with it. But it is still an ace, which is a good card as far as I know, and it's suited, so we can make some hands with it. I decide to step on the pedal this time. I make it $4,800. Santos cold calls the re-raise from the middle blind with 7-5. Standard. Martin also calls with his 9-8 off, and Mo calls on the button with 9-deuce. Just a testament to how much these guys like action. It was definitely a fun game, needless to say. But anyways, we go 4 ways to a flop, which is not bad. Ace, Jack, 3 with 2 clubs. So we do have top pair, but not much else aside from that. Also, our kicker sucks. There's no backdoor flush draw going on. I'm out of position. Pretty dicey spot, even with top pair. So I start with a check. Santos checks, Martin checks, and now Mo puts in a bet of $12,000. Back to me, and of course I'm going nowhere just yet. Check raise seems somewhat ridiculous, so I just call. Santos and Martin get out of the way, so we're going heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of spades. I check it again, and this time Mo bets $30,000. That's right, just a little 30K bet. Now it's on me, and look at my stack. Sure, it's a lot of real-life money, but in terms of this game, it's not a whole lot, just 90K. And if I make the call, I'm going to have 60K back, and the pot is going to be like 100K. So I think the play here is to either let it go and wait for a better spot, or jam it all in there and deny equity if he's bluffing with a flush draw, maybe some sort of combo draw, like a straight and a flush draw, or a pair and a flush draw, for example, like 8x of clubs. He could also have a hand like 5 deuce of spades, or you guys get the idea. All sorts of holdings that might stab on the flop once checked to, and then continue to try to apply pressure on the turn. So after some thought, I do eventually decide to rip it all in there, somewhat dreading the old snap call, but luckily it does not come, and at that point, I'm pretty sure I've got the best hand. It would suck if he's playing a hand like ace-9 offsuit this way, and we end up getting felted, but it turns out he just has the 9-high flush draw, which is exactly what I was hoping for, because now Mo is in a tough spot. He's got to call $60,000 to win a pot that is $164,000 right now. Not a fun situation for him at all. I certainly don't envy this spot. In the end, though, he decides to fold, which I am more than okay with. Of course, if he called and bricked on the river, that'd have been cool too, but you never know. Maybe he would have made a flush and we lose a bunch of money. So I'll take this one down. And just like that, we are up to 164K in our stack, which means we're only down around 35. Not as bad as it was earlier.
Deny the equity, and you win $56,000. The kid is back.
And with that, we arrive at the last hand of the stream, but stay tuned because I played quite a few big pots after the cameras were shut off. Anyway, in this one, I've got ace-9 in late position, a little bit wide perhaps, but we are in late position and ace-9 ain't that bad. So I make it 2K and get 3 callers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of ace-jack 4, 2 spades. We are 4 ways, and I have a mediocre top pair. So when it gets to me, I think checking is probably okay, but betting also seems to make sense. We also have a spade, which is not too bad. So I continue with a bet of 2,500. Now it gets to Pepe, who check raises to 7,000. I thought this was odd for a few different reasons. Primarily that this board should be a lot better for me. And also, what strong hands could he really have here? If he had pocket aces or pocket jacks, he probably would have re-raised pre-flop. Sure, he could have pocket 4s, ace 4, ace jack, but those hands, not only are they hard to hit, but also a lot less likely since I've got an ace. That said, it's also difficult to assign many bluffs for this check raise. I guess occasional flush draws or combo draws like queen 10 of spades or, king 10 of spades, but there aren't too many possibilities of that either, only 2 or 3. So kind of a weird spot already, just right here on the flop. Part of me wanted to just let it go, but maybe a little embarrassed about playing too tight on the stream, or maybe I just thought we might still have the best hand sometimes, or could hit a 9 to improve. I don't know, it was already a tough situation, but whatever. It's a small size and the pot's already pretty big. We have position, I call. Let's see what happens on the turn, which is the 5 of clubs. Now Pepe checks it, and I think I should have bet small here, but I end up checking back. I'm glad I did check back because as you guys can see, he's got me in terrible shape with ace-jack suited. that decides not to re-raise pre-flop. By the way, I told you guys earlier this video that Pepe can be a little bit tricky pre-flop with some of these holdings, right? Anyway, let's see what happens on this river, which is what I call an action card.
Mariano pot controls. And that's a bad card for Mariano. Can Pepe find one more check? No. It's an easy call.
I got an ace, Pepe.
Yep, so this last hand does not work out for me. A mini cooler, you could say, and we lose a decent chunk before ending the stream. Not a great result so far, but as mentioned at the start of this hand, I played a lot of big pots afterwards. Stay tuned, because I'm about to go over those right now. Okay, so we just finished playing and I'm pretty exhausted. It's been like 10 hours of poker or something like that. The game went on for a long while after the cameras were shut off and a lot of interesting hands were played. So let me go over those real quick and then we're gonna wrap today's video up. So in the first interesting hand, immediately after the stream ended, in fact, right as it was ending, this hand came up where Martin opened from late position to $5,000 with the $800 straddle on. So it was 1, 2, 4, 8, I believe. He opens to 5,000 in late position. I look down at red queens in the, I want to say the small blind or the middle blind. Anyway, I make it 20,000 over his $5,000 raise. Brandon cold calls on my left, and then it gets to Martin, who also calls. So the pot's already over 60K. We go to a flop, which is not the best ever for queens. It's king 9-3. So yeah, obviously there's an overcard to my queens, but at the same time, we have some removal to king queen, which is the most likely top pair since ace king would at least sometimes re-raise pre-flop after I make it 20. So I decide to check it since it's three ways. Heads up, probably lean a little more towards betting. Not sure if that's correct, but that's what I did. Small bet probably is fine too, but I check, Brandon checks, and Martin checks back. Turn card's an offsuit deuce. Looks pretty innocent to me. So I decide to bet small now. I put in 16,000. Brandon folds, but Martin calls. A little concerning perhaps because sure, we could have the best hand, but he could also be playing a king this way. Maybe even slow playing, say a hand like a turn set or whatever. Not too likely, but I'm not in love with the situation necessarily, and much less when the river comes the ace of spades, which means we now lose to quite a few more hands than we did on the turn. Obviously, any random ace high that floats the turn gets there. Questionable whether or not he would do that. I think he probably wouldn't, but if it was like ace jack or ace 10. However, there are a lot of wheel draws on the turn, like ace 5 suited, ace 4 suited, maybe even a hand like ace 3 or ace deuce suited that has a pair and calls versus a small size. So I decided to check it. Looking back, I kind of wish I bet small again since this card is so much better for me than for him. On paper, obviously not in this exact situation, if you guys know what I mean. But I decided to check it, and now he puts in a bet of $45,000. Kind of a tough spot, but the more I think about it, the more it seems like he probably doesn't have much. So I think call is probably fine. At the same time, we have one of the worst hands we would have in this situation. I could easily have an ace myself, ace king, a set. Yeah, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I took a while with this one, and I'm not gonna lie, the sheer amount of money that this river bet was is certainly a factor since this was a huge game for me, probably the craziest action game I've ever played. At the bare minimum, like top 3 craziest games I've played. So yeah, $45,000 is quite a big chunk of change still. If it was a smaller game, I'd probably call a lot quicker. But in this case, I ended up folding, and I'm not sure if it was the correct fold or not because he did not show. But the more I think about the hand, the more I feel like I most likely got bluffed. Anyway, live and learn, I guess. Maybe I'll ask Martin and he'll let me know. Moving on to the next hand, that was quite a long one, but it was a pretty interesting one, I think. In this next one, Nick Airball has joined the game. There's a raise to 2,000 from Mo. I make it 7,000 on the button. I have pocket kings. Nice, good-looking hand pre-flop once again. Nick Airball cold calls the 11,000 from the straddle, and now Ryan Feldman, who has also joined the game, makes it 31,000. It's at this point I realize Ryan was actually the original raiser for 2,000, not Mo. So yeah, I was a little confused about the pre-flop action here. Mo now folds, and Ryan started the hand with 100K, so he already put in like a third of his stack. So I just jam all in. There's also Nick's 11,000 in there. So I think Ryan's probably going to be priced in with any hand he has, unless it's like pretty bad. Nick folds, and then Ryan pretty much snap folds too. So this was just a pre-flop hand. Didn't even get to see any cards on the table, but we do take down like $40,000 in profit or so just by getting action with pocket kings. And that brings us to the third and most interesting hand post-flop. This one was absolutely wild, so hang on because I don't want to mess it up. You're gonna have to pay attention, it's kind of weird. I am in the $800 straddle, and Santosh on my left has straddled to 1,600. Action gets all the way around to me, so it's just us two left in the hand. I have 10-8 offsuit, and based on my studying, it sounds like 10-8 offsuit goes ham. If you don't know what that means, all I'm trying to say is that 10-8 offsuit does like to play aggressively, at times at least. Not sure if this is a correct application of that strategy. In fact, I'm fairly certain it's not, but nevertheless, I'm in the blinds, and I think if my memory serves me right, 10-8 likes to go crazy sometimes. So I decided to just call, since I would call all my hands most of the time, blind versus blind. But then when Santosh makes it 4,000 from the 1,600 straddle, I now limp raise to 15,000. I think I made it. Santosh thinks for a bit and calls, which is by far the worst outcome for me, because now we're playing a hand in this bloated pot out of position with 10-8 offsuit, over 30K in the middle. Obviously, if he goes all in, it's an easy fold, and if he ends up just folding, then we get a pretty big win by taking down like 5,000 uncontested dollars pre-flop with 10 high, but instead we're gonna have to go play a flop, which is not bad for 10-8 off. It's Jack 9-5 rainbow, so we have an open ender in a spot where I don't think Santosh is going to think I have an open ender. He probably puts me on an overpair since I've been playing relatively snug most of the night. And essentially all my hands today at Showdown have been pretty good cards. So with that said, I elect to bet small. I put in 11,000 and he makes the call. Turn card is the king of clubs. Brings in a backdoor flush draw, I think. So a good card for me. I still just have 10 high, but I'll often have ace king, aces, kings, maybe king queen suited once in a while, pocket jacks, you know, the good stuff. However, I decided to get sneaky and check it and fire off on the river. That was my plan at the time. Not recommended to check out of position with 10 high, but it's only the turn, so I'm not giving up on this hand just yet, and I think it might look strong to Santosh if I decide to check. Makes it look like I want him to bluff or something. So yeah, I check it, and he checks it back. River card is a good one. It's the 7 of hearts, which means we now have the second nuts. Queen 10 is the nuts, but he probably would not check back the nuts on the turn. So we essentially have the nuts in a situation where I think Santosh is gonna think that I've just got an overpair or ace king, for example. So I decide to bet small, $16,000 into this pot, trying to make it look like a thin value bet with a single pair holding, and hopefully induce a raise from either a bluff or a lesser hand, like say he has 2 pair, or I guess just that. Yeah, so I put in 16,000. Santosh gives music to my ears and announces a raise up to, I believe, 46,000. I think he made it. I think he made it 25 additional or 30 additional. I can't really remember the exact amount, but at this point, I only had like a little bit more than what his raise was for, so I just jammed all in. He shrugs and calls, and after I turn it over, we win. So finally, after playing all day long, we finally win a big pot. It was, I think, $250,000, which is a giant pot, for me at least, and a very welcome one because it had been a pretty rough day up until that point, and now we are finally up a good amount, right around 50K. And that brings us to this next hand where I had ace king. I make it 1,000. Then Nick Airball makes it 6,000 from the small blind. I opened from early position and ace king offsuit, I think deep stacked, does like to call pre-flop sometimes. Re-raising also completely reasonable, but this time I just call in position and we got a great flop. It's king 6-6. Not only do I have a super strong hand, but it's also a board that I'm often not going to connect with, and Nick should try to represent if he doesn't have anything, since he was the re-raiser pre-flop. So sure enough, he does put in a bet of $4,000. I just call and we see a blank on the turn. I think it was like a 7 or an 8, something like that. Now he bets $25,000. Pretty damn big bet, but what am I gonna do, right? I call again, and the river is a 6. So now we have a full house, only losing to pocket aces, quads, or pocket kings, but 99% of the time we're gonna have the winning hand. Nick seems to be done with it at this point and just checks. Even though my hand is super strong, not really sure we're gonna get value from a worse hand. He seemed like his body language was, he's just kind of over the hand. So I decided to just check it back and he gives it the head shake. I turn it over and we win. Just like that, we are suddenly up nearly $100,000. And after that, I continued to chip away at small pots, playing 5-handed here post-stream. Didn't really lose any major ones and won a few tiny ones. So in the end, I ended up winning $114,000, which are all these chips right here. Happy ending after all. It was a rough stream. I was pretty spot dead most of the time. I don't even know what that term means exactly, but Andrew Nemi texted it like 20 minutes ago. He said that I was spot dead on stream, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use that. But I think what it means is nothing really that great was happening for me, and I agree with that text that Andrew sent. I never really had many chances to go for value. The few times I did have a very strong hand, my opponents didn't have anything, and yeah, it's just kind of how it goes all day. There was also that questionable river value bet against Pepe with the aces. We could argue about whether or not it was too thin. I'm sure most people out there will say that it was. Wouldn't be the first time that I got accused of overplaying a hand. It probably was an overplay. Who knows? Who cares? We ended up winning $114,000. So yeah, that's the end of today's video. Tomorrow I have an eye doctor appointment to try to get this shit fixed so I don't have to wear sunglasses on stream anymore like a dumbass. No offense if you guys are into sunglasses, just personally I think it's a bad look. So the sooner I can get out of these, the better. As always, thank you guys for all the support. Thank you for watching. Thank you for giving this video a thumbs up or a comment if you did. Joey is gonna have his work cut out for him editing this one, so we appreciate that. That's all I got, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed, and good luck until next time at your local tables. Peace.